With us right now is John Heffernan, who is the director of one of the core programs of the Robert Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights, which is called Speak Truth to Power. And I will not introduce what the program is about. I would actually like to ask, the question to John to explain us a little bit what the program is about and what the importance is of education for human rights.
Sure, great. Thanks, Imco, and it's such a pleasure for me to be here tonight. 30 years ago, I studied in Florence, like a lot of you, and at one point I could speak the language, but ho perso la lingua, mi dispiace. So I will speak in English, and once again, it's just such a pleasure, and I greet my colleagues at RFK Europe, and thank you for putting together such a tremendous event. Speak Truth to Power, or in Italian, as we call it, Coraggio senza confini, emerged from a book that Carrie Kennedy wrote about 10 years ago. She interviewed 51 human rights activists around the world that she describes as being the most courageous people on earth. These are people who have suffered repression and torture, but we do not focus on that. What we focus on is what Elie Wiesel did behind me when he said, what hurts the victim the most is not the silence of the bystander, is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander. So our goal in Speak Truth to Power is to model behavior represented by people like Elie Wiesel and Dalai Lama and Marina Pishvalakova, who is a human rights activist in Russia, who took it upon herself to create a domestic violence hotline 10 years ago, and now she has 150 domestic violence centers throughout Russia. So it started off as a book, and then it is also a photo exhibit, as well as a play. A human rights activist, playwright Ariel Dorfman adapted it into a play. And then what I spend most of my time on is our human rights curriculum. That is taught all over the world, particularly in Europe, where over 400,000 students have been exposed to this curriculum, where we tell stories about these human rights activists, and we urge young people to self-identify as human rights activists in their personal lives, in their homes, and their communities. The idea being that nobody in the face of injustice and inequality can afford to be a bystander.
Thank you for explaining what Speak Truth to Power is. I would like to ask you a question that I've asked to a number of persons already, tonight, that have already been with us from the US. I nevertheless want to ask you the question also. What, according to you, are the most what is the most important unfinished business, let's say, regarding human rights in the United States? What are the most urgent issues to be addressed by the next president of the United States in terms of human rights, domestically speaking?
You know, the answer to that, as far as I'm concerned, also applies globally. And what it really talks about is prevention more than anything. I think that we need to focus our efforts on preventative measures, a much better investment than having to respond to conflict, injustice, and inequality, where basic human rights are violated. There's no better way to prevent human rights abuses than through education. And so I would like to think that here in the US and around the world, we should really focus our efforts about preserving the right to education, but just not any education. As far as I'm concerned, knowledge is a power, but it's about teaching students via the lens of a human rights framework so they understand the basic human rights and how to protect them, so that young people are empowered to respond to situations where where there are injustices and inequalities. Obviously, there are a lot of other human rights issues, but I think if we start with the basics, and the younger the better, so that the 6 or 7-year-old knows that indeed everybody has a right to a roof over their head. Everybody has the right to clean water. I think that's where we start, and I think that's where we can prevent human rights abuses and be in a position where we don't have to respond, where we don't have to react to those horrible human rights abuses around the world.
I have as you know, this is an event which is now here tonight. and early morning, tomorrow morning for us at least. But also the first part of this event was a 1.5-day seminar for university students. I think the age range is 20-22 approximately. They are Italian university students from a main university in Milan, the University of Florence, a main university in Rome, the Lewis and the Bocconi, that were actually the names of the universities, also with US students that actually study here, as you said, also you did, I mean, a number of years ago. What can university students do of that age? I mean, I believe there is, in the beginning of a project at Washington University, if I'm not wrong, but more in general, I would like to know what university students can actually do in promoting human rights in education. You say we have to start as early as possible, but is there still hope for persons that are 20, 22 years old?
I should hope that there's hope for 22-year-olds. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to start as early as possible. But I think one of the things that university students can do that's really, really important is understand those mechanisms that were created as a result of what happened during World War II that actually protect human rights, that are codified in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that are the agencies that were established post-World War II with regards to the UN and the conventions, the Prevention of the Genocide Convention that led to further justice measures, the International Criminal Court, that in fact there are legal mechanisms out there that can prevent and respond to abuses of human rights. So I think that, in a sense, is number one, is learn what those mechanisms are, and then make an effort to there's nothing better than to have somebody who is 22, 23 years old, who's not too far away from elementary and high school education, to become engaged in teaching those kids. We've established a project, as you mentioned, IMCO, with Washington College of Law just up the road here in Washington, D.C., where we have 10 law school fellows. We call them Speak Truth to Power Law School Fellows. And they are learning about human rights vis-a-vis the Speak Truth to Power human rights curriculum and the courageous individuals that are featured in that curriculum. But then they also learn about how to teach human rights, and are indeed going out to high schools in Washington and teaching human rights to young people.
Thank you so much, John. One other question, a final question. Although you are dealing mainly with teaching human rights in the United States, I know, of course, we have programs now in Sweden, in Italy, of course. It's a rather extensive program that has already been done, a lot of teaching at the various levels in school. I would like to ask you something about the international role of the United States. Do you still think that the United States has a message for the world in terms of human rights education, in the promotion of human rights, of democracy, as it maybe had 10, 20 or more years ago? Is it as strong as it was? Has it changed? What is the status today of the U.S. as an example? Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I don't think there's anybody out there, any country or any state, that has totally clean hands. But at the end of the day, the U.S. is a great democracy that has promoted human rights both here within the U.S. and overseas. I think we have to probably recognize our shortcomings, but that isn't to say that we can't promote democracy and human rights overseas. My fear is if Governor Romney is elected, that will not be the case. My fear is that those international institutions that I mentioned just a little while ago will not be supported like they should be. It was Bobby Kennedy that said, "This is our vision for the world, a diversity of states bound together by respect for the rights of others, by a loyalty to the world community, and by faith in the dignity and responsibility of man." And I do honestly believe that this is what the Obama administration has supported throughout the last 4 years, a world where the most marginalized, disenfranchised are protected from human rights being violated. My fear is that if Governor Romney is elected, that we will be facing issues such as disenfranchised voters, where he has supported strict ID requirements for voter registration that really impact the elderly, poor, and others, the most marginalized, so that people can't even exercise their right to vote. My fear is that there's been little talk among the Romney camp about environmental rights. Here on the East Coast, we were recovering from the worst storm disasters in history. Down the road where Stephen lives, just a few years ago in New Orleans, we saw almost a total destruction of the city. Around the world, clean water is hard to come by and becoming more and more. So environmental rights are key, as well as women's rights. We hear Romney talk about, preventing women from really controlling their own destiny. And these are things that we need to pay attention to. And I do believe that the U.S. Government and the people of the U.S. are in a position to promote the protection of human rights, both in the U.S. and globally.
A last question, also because
Sure.
we are a non-partisan or a-partisan organization. I would like you to know, I would like to know whether there's anything that you expected Obama to do in his first term, and it may be only one, but it may be 2 terms, let's say at first, but let's say in these 4 years, is there anything you would have expected him to do more than he actually did? Of course, concerning human rights, so that there is still, that also the Obama administration, if he would be re-elected, would have to be pushed by human rights organizations to go just another mile and to do other things or more things than it actually has done so far? What would it be?
Yeah, no, I think that Obama has really taken some pretty significant risks sometimes not the most politically advantageous on his part in terms of supporting universal health care for everybody here in the U.S. Was probably not the most politically advantageous position for him to take, but he took that risk. And I think that's authentic, and I think that's genuine. I know there has been concern since the beginning of the Obama administration about issues regarding China. I think that concerning human rights, and I do think that the administration has become more and more of a vocal advocate for the protection of human rights in China. I do think with a second administration, he will be given a clearer mandate where indeed he has more of an opportunity to promote the protection of human rights worldwide that he clearly stands for.
John, I'm here at the stage with a university professor from the Bocconi University in Milan who teaches international law. Among other things, he is specializing in the economic part of international law, but his competences go much beyond that. And he asked me whether he can ask you a question. So his name is Giorgio Sacerdoti, and please go ahead.
Thank you.
Watch that. You have to watch in the camera.
Yes, my question is not so much on economics, but on the main Italian newspaper, Corriere della Sera today, there was a known commentator criticizing generally both candidates, saying that there's little emphasis on the traditional transatlantic cooperation between the US and Europe, and which was traditionally based on democratic values, which then helped also the United States to project worldwide its image of a champion of democracy and human rights, whereas he thought that now even Obama looks at the world somehow a la carte and has relations with, naturally, with all powers around concerned, China, Russia, Latin America, and instead the look, and of course the Iran, the Middle East, terrorism, without downplaying this traditional axis which then projected more the United States and somehow diminishing the role of Europe in that respect, and being more, I understand, more realpolitik and less idealistic. What do you think about this comment?
You know, I think it's tricky. I think it's tricky for any president to sort of navigate the waters of international affairs. I certainly see that, certainly at the beginning of the Obama administration, in terms of the efforts to support Arab Spring and some of the other movements, or of late what we've seen in Burma. I don't think we would have ever seen, imagined what's happened in Burma recently in terms of opening up and freedoms and that. So, you know, I think it's a difficult thing. I do know that in terms of aid that the U.S. has put forth toward democracy and governments out of the United States the United States Agency for International Development has really focused on providing aid to burgeoning democracies around the world. I used to work for an organization called NDI, National Democratic Institute, and it works all over the world, as well as International Republican Institute, really promoting democratic institutions in terms of elections, in terms of judiciaries, in terms of legislatures. So I do think that you know, the Obama administration has not necessarily turned an eye inward. I think there are lots of efforts out there that actually don't get much notice, where the U.S. is playing a pretty significant role in terms of promoting democracy and human rights.
They indicate me that we have another connection. So, John, we have to leave you here. Thank you so much for being with us and answering all our questions. And see you soon.
My pleasure. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.